Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to watch this webcast that we're putting on for you on an important topic on which there's a lot of confusion out there. So my hope is to demystify this, simplify it, and kind of show you how you can benefit from it. So to get started, I'm Trey Raymer. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at EightTwenty. EightTwenty is a solar EPC company. I'm a CPA with over 20 years experience, including over a decade at Ernst Young, EY, Big Four public accounting firm. So while I'm a CPA, I have to be clear, I'm not providing tax or legal advice on this webcast, but I am providing information, and my hope is that you'll find it to be beneficial. I'll get into a lot of the details around how this fits into the broad range of the incentives that are available for solar projects here shortly, but just know that this is one piece of that pie. This is a particular adder that's very powerful that we've taken customers through and to where we've had very successful outcomes. And that's where I want to share very practical insights with you today on this webcast. So this is not going to be a big theoretical discussion. It's going to be very practical in what we've seen and where we've seen this be successful with our customers and how you can benefit as well. So what's the headline here? In this program, there was sky high demand. So in a program in which there was a maximum amount of capacity to be awarded of 1.8 gigawatts, there were over 8 gigawatts of applications that came in that initial window. So this program was launched in October of 2023. It closed in February of 2024 with just an enormous amount of interest, an enormous number of submissions and applications. And so what I could talk through today is, where we've seen that be successful, where we've successfully navigated our clients through that process, as you may be thinking about that moving forward, or you may have an application that's still out there waiting to receive a judgment on, and I'll give you insights on kind of what to expect next in that regard. So this next slide here, this is sort of my executive summary. Here's the key highlights from that 2023 program, as well as changes that are coming to the 2024 program. That 2024 program has not been launched yet. It could happen any day now. But the 2023 program has closed as far as no new applications can come into that one, but they're still going through and reviewing applications through that process. But most of it has already been awarded. And so there's a lot of observations that can be communicated as it relates to that. So program highlights, you look up here in the top left. I'm a native of Oklahoma, so forgive the reference here, but best way to describe it is there was just a land run on Category 1 and Category 4. So Category 1 on the commercial side, and in Category 4, which is more of your community solar projects. Each of those had an excess of 3.7 gigawatts of submissions. And the available capacity on those was 210 megawatts and 700 megawatts, respectively. But even within that, there's a lot of lessons to be learned and observations to be communicated around that. Sort of on the flip side, if you look at low-income housing and Indian land, there was frankly, just a big missed opportunity there. As far as the number of submissions that came in were way below the available capacity. So only 35% of the available capacity for low-income housing meeting certain criteria was applied for, and only 20% of Indian land capacity was applied for. So there was just a lot of projects that could have been approved. Not going to happen because they weren't submitted. And so those are things to think about as we move forward. But, as we go back here and look at the middle column here, firsthand observations. So I'll start by saying this is a very impressive process the government put together here. So I don't know that you expected to turn on this webcast and hearing a bunch of praise for the government, but it's true. So I'm happy to be able to provide that feedback. They put together a really well thought out process with good reference tools, FAQ documents, things of that nature that you may not want to dive in and do all the research around it. We've done that already and can help shepherd you through the process. But government really did an impressive job putting this together. The second thing is the additional selection criteria mattered a lot. I'll get into that over the course of the presentation, but at a high level, half of all of the capacity to be awarded was set aside to go to projects meeting one or both of the additional selection criteria. And the importance of that just cannot be understated. And you'll see that as I start getting through the numbers here on the following slides. Also here, I note FAQs, frequently asked questions document that the government put out, very helpful. And I can tell you from going through the process with several customers successfully that, as an example, we had a Category 3, a LIHTC project, going through this process and one of the things that has to be provided there is a benefit sharing statement. And, at the time, there wasn't just a whole lot of guidance around how to put that together. So, did the best we could, and the customer could, putting that together, submitted it. The government came back and said, we recommend you look at FAQ number 46 and provide that format and send it back to us. So we did that, sent it back, and very quickly that one was approved. And so it was great to kind of see that the way that process worked and the way that the feedback from the government played itself out in a very helpful manner. So then as we look ahead, changes to allocations, and I'll be kind of showing you how all those allocations stack up over the following slides, but just note that category 1 had a decrease in its allocation from 700 megawatts down to 600. And then sub-allocations between residential and commercial, which I'll show you in some following slides, were adjusted as well. And category 4 had an increase from 700 megawatts up to 800 megawatts. So that's one change. Another thing to note is when the program does launch, which again could be any day now, there will be a 30-day window. And this is similar to how they launched it last year in 2023. But what that means is when they do announce that the program has been launched, there will be a 30-day period in which if you submit your application on day 30, it will be treated the same as if you submitted that application on day 1. But it's very important in this process that you're in that first window because you're getting priority over others. And as you've seen, there's just a lot of demand for this. So being early is important through this. I'd also note that those additional selection criteria continue to matter. In the guidance that's been released, they've made that very clear. Again, it will get 50% of all the allocations. And when those projects with additional selection criteria are oversubscribed, meaning that there's more applications that have been submitted in that category than there are allocations, that excess will get priority over the non-ASC, non-additional selection criteria applications. So that's really important to keep in mind. And one thing I'd also note, it's not on this slide, but an important change. The initial program, 2023, allowed you 21 business days from the time in which the government sent comments, questions to you before you had to respond, before your application would be deemed to be null and invalid. That period has actually been reduced from 21 days down to 12. So 12 business days moving forward. And so two things I'd highlight there. The first is it's very important that the email address that you use when you submit is an email address that's actively monitored because ultimately the government could send you a communication. If you don't see it for a couple of weeks, you're just out of luck through this. So that needs to be monitored. And the second thing is, having a strong, well-qualified EPC working with you to help you answer and address those questions. At this point, we've seen several of these go through successfully, and we've seen questions from the government. So it's likely that some of those questions on future applications may be similar to what we've seen, and we can help shepherd you through that process. So with that, I'm going to dive into a little bit more on this topic. So, I've sort of launched right into this low-income tax adder, but it really fits into a larger scope that needs to be addressed. So to put this into context. So the first thing I'd say is when we're talking about these adders, they're very specific to commercial and nonprofit jobs. What I really mean by that is they're not for homeowners, for an individual home. There's a completely different tax code for that. That would be Section 25D. What we're talking about now is Section 48, which is for commercial and nonprofit businesses. In the context, you might say, hey, you mentioned residential earlier, but that's in the context of like a residential apartment building. And you'll see that here in a moment. But here, as we look at this slide, you'll notice here at the bottom, there's the 30% investment tax credit. So that's your baseline on the project. And these ITC stackable adder tax credits. There's 3 different ones shown here. What we're talking about today is the low income community tax adder. And there's 4 categories within that. The first 2 will give you a 10% additional tax credit, and category 3 and 4 will give you a 20% tax credit. So we'll walk through each of those 4. I could do separate webcasts on these other tax credit. Won't get into the details of those today, but know that there's an energy community tax credit, which can give you another 10%, and then a domestic content tax credit that will give you another 10. So in theory, if you were able to get all of these tax credits, you would have not just a 30% tax credit, but a 70% tax credit. I can't say that I've seen that yet or that it's going to be all that common, but it's possible. And we'll see more and more projects that are getting 10 to 20 to 30 on up on these tax credits, which just makes projects very compelling as you start to do the economics. Last thing I would note here is that these percentages are law of the land for anything that is 1 megawatt or less, without any additional procedures that need to be done. For projects that are over 1 megawatt, there's an additional set of requirements around prevailing wage and apprenticeship. And as long as those are met, you would get each of these percentages that are shown. If those are not met, then it drops down from 30% here to 6%, and from, say, 10% here down to 2%. So it's very punitive if you don't. So it's very important that whatever solar installer you're working with understands those prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements if the project's over 1 megawatt. That's certainly something that we have that insight into at EightTwenty. Happy to answer further questions on that, and look forward to further dialogue. My contact information is going to be at the end of this slide deck, and look forward to having that dialogue with you as we move forward. So that's background there. So I mentioned the 4 different categories of low-income communities in this slide. I know it has a lot of text, and I won't read it all, but I do want to just give some highlights. So category 1, which is the low-income community, is what it's called. It's effectively just, you have to have poverty rates of at least a certain percentage, other metrics that you'll note in here. But I'd say rather than kind of worrying about all that detail, there's a map that's been developed by the government. And I'm going to show you some screenshots of that, to where you basically type in your address that you're looking for, and it'll tell you whether you're in that or not. So what's an example? I'll try to give examples of each of these. So a business in a low-income community would be a great example of something that could meet a category 1. Category 2 is located on Indian land. So, that means any land located within the boundaries of an Indian reservation, pueblo, or ranchera, lands held by a tribe. You can see additional guidance down here below. So this is an example here, a business that's on Indian land would be able to receive that category 2 adder. For category 3, that's low-income residential building project. So that's a project that has to be installed on a residential rental building that's part of a housing program under the different government programs that are listed below. So think multifamily, LIHTC building, low-income housing tax credit buildings there. And then the 4th one here, low-income economic benefit project, think community solar. And this is where projects that have at least 50% of the financial benefits of the electricity produced being provided to households with incomes of less than 200% of the poverty line or 80% of area median gross income. So I just want to level set on what those definitions mean, because I'm going to use these terms throughout the rest of the presentation. So we look here in the 4 different categories from the 2023 program. First 2 get the 10% bonus adder, the next 2 get the 20%. And here's how that 1.8 gigawatts was allocated. So 700 megawatts to category 1, 200 megawatts each to categories 2 and 3, and then 700 megawatts to category 4. There's further differentiation of category 1. So of that 700 megawatts, 490 megawatts went to residential. Think residential apartment complex that's not in a government set aside program. 490 megawatts there, or think commercial or nonprofit entities, got the 210 remaining megawatts on that program. So here for category 1, this map that I referenced earlier is very important. It's also very intuitive. And so I'm going to show you here of, the first thing you would note is, as you look at this map of the United States, everything in green is a low-income community. So first observation is there's a lot of low-income communities out there across the country that can take advantage of this. You'll also see that there's some purple coloring out here, and that's for the additional selection criteria specific to geography. And so that matters for prioritization. Now, it's interesting and somewhat counterintuitive when you look at the map, but these areas that are purple on here mean that they're disadvantaged communities, but not actually low-income communities. 2 different definitions, so that can happen. That matters because if you type in an address and you see the purple and you get excited about it, but if it's also not green, then it doesn't qualify for under category 1 here. So when you look at this map, kind of how do you interact with it? So first, you see the map layers, all of them checked right here. You see what's available. This next map, I've just unchecked the category 1 eligibility. So this is for the additional selection criteria of geography. Everything in purple meets that. So I'll give you a specific address here of how you would utilize this tool. So there's the search bar up at the top, type in your address. boom, it immediately populates that. And you can see, okay, great. This address is in a low income community. It's green. That's how you know that. Well, how do you know whether it has additional selection criteria? Well, you would then go down and uncheck that box down there in the map layer, and then voila, great. It's also meeting the additional selection criteria. So for this, not only is it meeting category 1, but you get that prioritization. If it didn't meet any of those additional selection criteria, this would just be a white screen instead of purple. So reference this several times. So additional selection criteria, 50% of all categories are reserved for this. And there's two things. So it's ownership and it's geography. So ownership, think tax exempt entities, think tribal. There's a few others that are very specific that I won't get into, but you meet one of those, great, you get priority. If you meet the geographic requirements, think that map I was just showing you there. If you're in a disadvantaged community, then you get priority. So ownership and geography, very important through this process. So how does that really work, in practice? So this slide kind of shows you if you meet both of those, and we had a client, had a customer that it was a nonprofit doing amazing work, and they, as being a nonprofit owning the project, met that ownership criteria. They were also located in a disadvantaged area, so they met both. And when you meet both, that gives you the top level of priority. And we saw that going through the process. That was the first one that we began to see communication back from the government on. And they were awarded very quickly through that process. Not surprisingly, given that we knew that they would be at the very top of the line. What we show here in review order number 2 is indicating that if you meet one, but not both of those 2 additional selection criteria, then you're going to be next in line. It doesn't matter. They're both equally weighted the same. So geography and ownership, one's not weighted higher than the other. But if you meet one of the 2, then you're in this next layer of priority. If you don't meet either of the 2, then you are sort of that last level of priority. So here we go, hot off the press. What did we learn and what changes are coming? This slide is very important for a number of reasons. There's a lot of information on here, but I want to dive into it because it's important. So if you look here, this is the different categories. So category 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left-hand side. And here's those project types, including the additional selection criteria. So I referenced earlier, category 1 had a total of 700 megawatts. That was broken down to residential and to commercial for just being high-level descriptions on these. And half of those were set aside for the additional selection criteria. So we look here on the residential side first, you'll see, okay, there was 245 megawatts of capacity available. There have been 90 megawatts of approved submissions. There's nothing else pending at this time, and they're not taking any more. So this is an example of one where there was 154 megawatts of remaining capacity that's either going to be reallocated to other categories, which they can do, or they could push it forward to the 2024 program year. So in other words, this is another one of those missed opportunities, if you will. You see it on the Indian land down here, missed opportunity, and you see it on the qualified low-income residential building project here. So you might look at this and say, well, wait, how could this non-ASC piece have been approved for 303 megawatts when the total available was only 245? And it's because they're able to readjust, reallocate when there's shortages in certain areas. You can see that's clearly what happened here. Now, if I go down to the commercial nonprofit sector, this is really interesting when you look at this. So 105 megawatts set aside for additional selection criteria. They've already awarded 194 megawatts of that, so almost double. So they've had to take it from other areas to do that because the 1.8 total gigawatts isn't changing. And there's still another almost 500 megawatts of those applications that were pending. So some of those may be awarded, they may not be, because there's no available capacity. It's going to have to come from somewhere else. But notice here in the section that doesn't have additional selection criteria for the commercial nonprofit, over 3 gigawatts of applications were submitted. Not a single one has been approved yet. And there's probably not a lot of reason to be optimistic when you look at the data at this point that these will be. That's why I said at the beginning, the additional selection criteria matters so much in this process. Look here at the Indian land, both had plenty of capacity remaining. There's nothing else pending at this point. They've gone through those applications. The low income qualified low-income residential building projects. You can see here, almost everything has been flushed through on additional selection criteria, and they've almost hit the 100 megawatts on the non-ASC piece, and there's still some more to go, so they may reallocate up here. Time will tell. And you look down here to category 4, and this is similar situation when you look at the non-ASC, and there's just a ton of submissions for capacity that are likely not to be awarded in this period because there's just not going to be enough space for it. But you can see here that more than the 350 megawatts has been awarded for the ASC. Now, these two things combined is less than the 700, which is why you're seeing capacity be awarded here. So hopefully that provides a little insight on what's happening. These numbers have been updated as of this morning on April 25th. We check it tomorrow, they're likely to be a little different because they're updating this all the time. But this is as real-time information as I can provide right now. So what does this mean to my application? I've kind of talked through a lot of this, but I'm going to kind of go each of these categories again and kind of give the highlights. So for category 1, since fewer than the 245 megawatts of the additional selection criteria was submitted and approved, that remaining capacity could be applied to other categories or carried forward to the 2024 program. Just another way of presenting what I've talked about already. So I'm not going to go through all this in a ton of detail other than to again, highlight here, this is category 1 commercial, that additional selection criteria clearly took review priority over the non-ASC. And even in this category, projects that met both of those additional selection criteria were given higher priority than just meeting one of the two. And that mattered here when you've got so many applications in this particular category. Category 2, Indian land. Again, just say it again, it's just a missed opportunity. There's a lot of capacity. So if you have projects that you're considering on Indian land, please reach out to us. Happy to have those conversations and assist with that process. Really not a whole lot new here, which I talked about already on category 3. So this, I'll let you kind of take a look at this. And as a takeaway, same with category 4, which clearly you can see that the additional selection criteria took priority as you look at that data. So what to expect next? So if you have an application out there, you haven't yet heard back from the government, hopefully that will change soon as they're continuing to go through it. So make sure that you're monitoring your email. Customers receiving those email notifications from the DOE that their applications are under review. You gotta be on the lookout for those questions. You want to answer them quickly. One of the things we found is even with that initial 21-day business day window, if we responded right away, government would get back typically a week or less. So you would get your answer quicker, the quicker you responded is my point there. When you're looking at the timeline of a project, there's a very clear window in which this program is set up, which means you've got to have signed your purchase agreement, but you can't have placed that project in service yet before that award has been given to you. So that's an important thing to keep in mind just from the process perspective. But once that award has been granted, then you move from step 1 to step 2. And step 2 is sort of once that project has been completed, it's been placed in service, you have to attach documentation, including a PTO letter, permission to operate, and a professional engineer stamped as-built design plan, along with certain attestations. Attestations are required and certain documents are required in both step 1 and step 2. And those attestations and that submission has to be done under penalty of perjury. So very important, obviously, to take that seriously and to have people that can provide you good insight into what's needed in each of those steps of the way. So, all right, so we look at 2024. How is this going to be changing moving forward? This slide lays that out. So you can see here for category 1, I mentioned earlier that it was dropping from 700 megawatts in total to 600 megawatts. Well, this is how it's going to be allocated within each of those groups. So the residential apartment complex type projects took the brunt of that hit. 45 megawatt drop there, just a slight drop on the commercial nonprofit side, down from 105 megawatts to 100 megawatts. The no change to categories 2 or categories 3, and then category 4 had 100 megawatt in total increase, split 50-50 between additional selection criteria and non-additional selection criteria. This provides a timeline that we use with our customers to kind of educate and how this process works. So from the very beginning, sign the purchase agreement and begin the application. You can submit that application the same day you sign that purchase agreement. And I tell you, kind of as we walked through the process the first time, we felt pretty confident with it because we had done our diligence and looked through it, but you just never knew kind of what this was going to be like. We sat down with the customer, we're right behind his shoulder as he was filling out the application. And I can tell you from start to finish, it took less than 15 minutes, which was wonderful. And it took that, I mean, it was that amount of time because we were prepared, because he had the information we needed going into it. And that was category 1 application for that particular one. Now, a category 3 is going to take a little bit longer because you've got to put together a benefit sharing statement. But that's all a process that we're happy to assist the customers with as they're working through that. So again, sign the purchase agreement and begin the application. We have a wonderful grant analyst who is great at this process. You'll have access to me and our team as we work through this entire timeline here. So once that application has been put together, the next step is submitting it. Be on the lookout for those questions and respond to those promptly. And at a certain point, you'll have an application approval, which you see on this timeline is happening prior to it being placed into service. So once it's placed into service, you have step 2, submit that application. Be on the lookout for any questions from the government, respond to those. And then at that point, you'll be awarded, this additional tax credit that will come through the portal that you can put with your tax documentation and your tax filings to have that support here as the final step. So hopefully that provides a little clarity around how that process works. So just one quick slide here on 820. I mean, we are a best-in-class solar expert. You have to be able to do commercial type jobs successfully. And the expertise is not just on the build side, which we have plenty of, but it's also bringing additional expertise. We've got a whole professional services team we have listed here that provides financial, legal, tax expertise, other things of that nature. So we've got NABCEP certified solar designers working on these projects. We've got an architect helping the designs put in place. We have a structural engineer on staff. We have master electricians. We have a team of analysts to do the modeling, CPAs, a legal team, and our that assist with items as needed. And we've got a grant writer on staff and other support team members to assist with this process. You can see the certifications down here that we bring to the table. And we really appreciate your time listening to this today. You see my contact information up here. Would love to have continued conversations with you. Please reach out with any questions. And we look forward to this. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great day. Bye for now.